Hello everyone, welcome back. You're watching Empyrion Galactic Survival episode 96. I'm Igneous, and today we're continuing with the Cetorhinus, the head of the Cetorhinus, as it were. This is going to be the bridge that we're finally finishing. We kind of made one, and then we tore it down, and we started making another in the last episode, and this is pretty much where we left off. All we really have left to do is finish the front of this opening. We're going to have a platform underneath the bridge that's going to be where the static guns are kept, but we aren't going to be worrying about that right now. I'm going to be basically doing that as I install the guns so that it's kind of a form-fit custom arrangement for that specific location on the ship. So all we really need to do on the front of the ship now to get it more or less buttoned up and ready to move on is this front section, and it's basically the front half now of the bridge. And what I was thinking about is that this is really, if we're talking realistically how this thing would be used in a functional capacity, it's not so much a bridge as like a gunner's cockpit is what it boils down to. A very large gunner's cockpit, because it's not in the best position if you're wanting to survive an extended firefight. It's kind of obviously exposed and a very easy target, and it's not necessarily going to be the most convenient place to get to on the ship because it's all the way at the front, and no matter how you slice it, it's always going to be easier to get to the center of the ship above the hangar than it is to get to the front of it. So it makes sense that we have a cockpit there, and it makes sense that we spend a little bit of time making it look interesting. But in terms of the actual function, we don't need to worry about having a bunch of containers, a bunch of machines, anything like that. Anything that I would consider normal for the area around the most frequently used cockpit. So what we're going to be doing here is basically setting ourselves up for a very minimalist installation. For the cockpit, we're probably going to have some of the cosmetic screens and things like that in there just to make it look a little bit interesting. I've got some other ideas as well from an aesthetic point of view that we'll be working on once the entire structure of the ship is basically done. And what that puts us in a position to do is just kind of focus on how to close this up so that the exterior looks like it's in a good place. Not necessarily done, but in a position where all we have to do is add and tweak as opposed to overhaul large sections of it or all of it, as sometimes the case may be. So all we're really doing now is trying to extend it forward, starting from where we left off in the last episode, and doing so in a way that it's not going to be too uniform. It's not going to be like a rectangular shape or a square shape or a circle shape. It's going to be kind of an oblong kind of shape if you're looking down from above, and that's really all I have to work with at this point. It's another one of those things where, as I mentioned in the last episode, it was kind of going from the seat of my pants with the most basic of ideas for how I wanted everything to go together, and not necessarily any clue whatsoever in terms of the specific details. One of the things that this actually became a good example for, however, is the idea of making things fit together by changing the direction that you're working. And I'll get into a little more detail once we get to an example of this, because there will be at least a couple before we're done. The whole idea is that, for me, certainly, and I think for a lot of people when we start building, we tend to work in one direction. So in this case, we're working from the center of the ship away from it. Specifically in this case, towards the front, we're basically moving it forward as we go. It all starts from one location, and then we move in a specific direction from that location. What the location itself is pretty arbitrary. It doesn't really matter. It just kind of depends on where you start. But eventually, if we look at what we're doing, we can see quite clearly that we're working in one direction. What often happens, and what you'll see as we kind of advance a little bit farther forward, is that we start putting things together in a way that makes sense for what we're doing at that moment, and then we get a little bit farther forward and we have to kind of make transitions work, or we have to make things come together in ways that we hadn't specifically planned. And right here now, specifically is an example of this. I need to make this move forward in a way that looks interesting, it looks deliberate, it looks like it was part of a plan. And I'm looking at how we've got these 90-degree corners in the rectangular opening of this bridge, and how that's going to be kind of a problem for making a proper transition. So what I've decided to do is I'm extending some of these bands, maybe you could call them. We've got like these bands running around the circumference of the bridge so far, and that's kind of giving me a basis for how the shape is going to go. And then I'm removing some of these blocks that I had just placed because I realized they weren't going to be workable for what I now had planned, based on the location of the bands, that new profile that we've just established, based on how everything is coming together. So this was an example where we found something that we were just finished with, something we had just finished working on, wasn't actually going to work because we weren't thinking far enough forward to give a little bit of an examination to what we were going to need in order to make the transitions. So we gave ourselves a new profile to work with to kind of solidify in our heads and in the game exactly what it is that we needed to accomplish in order to make this work. And then we pulled it all together and we made it work. And now up here, we have to do kind of the same thing. We want to make some sort of a transition that looks deliberate, that looks interesting. It looks like it fits with the rest of the ship to some extent. We can always make minor adjustments for aesthetics, but it's really, really hard when the thing looks like it doesn't belong at all, to make things work in a way that we're happy with and we can move on without it kind of nagging at the back of our mind. So just like we did at the bottom, we're removing some of the blocks that we just placed here, and we're getting ready to make this transition. And we start pulling the 22.5-degree angles forward, and now we've got this big opening there. We fill it in with cubes. And now we have to kind of figure out how we're going to make the rest of this thing work. And it's that 90-degree interior corner that is going to give us problems, trying to make everything fit together in a way that looks like we did it on purpose. You can see I'm going down, checking what I did in the bottom, and then I've got this 45-degree angle corner that I throw down in place. And now this is where we start working in the opposite direction. We clear out a bunch of blocks to get them out of the way. And now we're going to start working from the front towards the back. So the exact opposite of what we had been doing. We place what we need, what we absolutely need in order to make this profile work, and then we start working backwards and kind of gradually removing blocks that we know we aren't going to need anymore, replacing them with blocks that we are going to be able to use. And what we end up with is the transition that we were looking for, relatively quickly and easily compared to the head scratching and things that could have been going on if we had tried to force it from the back to the front, the same direction that we'd been going all along. Now you can see we're closing it all up. Everything is relatively seamless. Well, I mean, by seamless, I mean everything is lining up. All of the seams are lining up the way that they should. Nothing stands out. Nothing is sticking out and distracting me, making me think that I'm going to have to change it anyways. So I might as well start over now. And then we go over to the other side and we do the exact same thing, removing the blocks that we know we're going to not need. And in this case, it's even easier because we've already done it. We can start placing things quicker and easier. We've got a little bit of experience recently gained in order to build the shape that we're looking for. And by the time we're done and we get back to the front section, everything is going to be in a much better position than it was when we started. And we're talking about just a few minutes to correct this issue that could have easily taken either a lot longer, thinking in terms of like 20 minutes to half an hour, trying to force things to work like I've done in the past, or even worse, being stuck with this partially complete design that I don't know how to fix, and I just have to leave the way it is because I can't think of anything better to do with it. That's kind of the worst case scenario. And you can see as everything gets placed, these last few blocks, it's actually not too bad. One of the things that I've been working on throughout this design, and it started with the superstructure. We started putting these sort of raised sections, look like ribs, on the sides of the ship back towards the hangar. And I've been kind of messing around with those a little bit here and there, throughout the design of the ship. We're going to be using them a lot more in this design, similar to how I went completely overboard with the vents the first time I started using them and just sort of jammed them wherever I could find a spot, because it was new for me, it was novel, it was fun, it was interesting. And then future builds, we've got it out of our system. We use it in a little bit more moderation, but this is a great opportunity to practice. So you can see we've got these 2 bands on the bridge and room to add some more of those raised sections to make it look a little bit more interesting. We're going to be adding some glass on the bridge, which is not something that I normally do. Glass is just far too flimsy, and it doesn't last very well at all, especially when you start taking a lot of damage from the stations out in space, because they tend to have a lot of guns and are very, very happy to use them. So we've got these bands, and now I came up with this idea to see what we could do to have something similar on the top of the bridge, just to add, because it was just this big flat surface and it didn't really fit with anything else that was going on with the ship. We don't have too many flat surfaces that I planned on keeping flat. So this was an example or an opportunity, not an example, while we were here to kind of mess around, add a little bit of visual interest, break up the surface, the top surface of the bridge. So the next episode, we're going to be starting in the back. It's finally time to move on to the back of the ship and start working on that. There's a number of details that are absolutely crucial that we get right, specifically the placement of certain things, and then it's all about the aesthetics. So we're probably going to spend, like I say, 2-3 episodes in the back end of the ship, and then we'll probably do something we haven't done in a while, and that's an episode or 2 on the detailing that we're going to be doing inside and outside of the ship, just to kind of mess around with it a little bit. And then the ship will basically be done. We'll have a blueprint for you and we can carry on, test it a little bit, and then we'll be on to the next build. So if you want to be notified about the next episode, the easiest way to do that is to subscribe to my channel or follow me on social media. Links for social media are always in the information section below the video. Feel free to leave your comments and feedback. Thanks for watching, guys, and take care.